sometimes we have outdoor circumstances that we have to be concerned with, and outdoors sometimes we have a surface like this, which is the sign to the cottage, but people are going to touch this, and we don't know whether or not the person who went in and committed this crime actually may have stood here and touched it. So what we're looking for is areas where someone might have touched, and of course it's difficult to see. Sometimes by using oblique lighting or looking at a surface in a different way, you can see where a print might be. For example, I can see right there, just using oblique lighting, that looks like apparently a smudge. And so I'd be interested in seeing whether or not that smudge, in fact, is a fingerprint that we can develop. Now, we've got a gray surface, and I'm going to use a gray fingerprint powder called Dual. And the reason I'm going to use it is it generally will come up as looking more silver than gray. So we're going to see if it works in this case. It's called Dual because it can be used on light surfaces and dark surfaces. I've got a fingerprint brush which has been used for Dual fingerprint powder in the past. So I'm just going to get some fingerprint powder on the dusting brush, and I'm going to shake off the excess. And now we're going to see whether or not we can develop that print. It's beginning to come up, and I can see ridge detail. Good ridge detail. You want to make the brush go in a number of different directions so that you coat all sides of the ridges. You don't want to over dust because then that would obliterate some of the ridges. Now, using a flashlight, you can see it a little better. I can see it pretty well from this angle. And so you can see that the fingerprint has a silver cast against a gray background, which is good. I can see it just fine. We might have chosen a fluorescent powder, which would have given, on an alternate light source, would have given us a fluorescent fingerprint that we could see very easily. If you don't have the alternate light source, or have one handy that you can move outside, then you can certainly use powder like Dual. Black print powder might shown up on this as well, since it's on a gray surface. Black on gray is sometimes you can see it. A white fingerprint powder may have given the same kind of contrast, the white on a dark, but again, white powder is not necessarily as sensitive as some of the other powders, which is why I chose the Dual powder. Aluminum flake powder might have worked on this as well. So here, another aspect of the scene. We have a scene where we have two bullet holes through the window, and so we're concerned that maybe someone might have been looking in the interior in order to see if maybe somebody was there. So we have a number of surfaces here that might be of interest. We have the glass, and we have the windowsills, and we have the frame between the glass. And so whether or not these have fingerprints on them is something that we need to explore. The windowsills themselves are sort of a light green, so we can use anything that's going to give us good contrast. The black powder, for example, would give good contrast on this windowsill, and you'd be able to see it just fine. You'd probably want to use a magnetic powder on this, and so that because it cleans up easily. On the glass, we would use a Dual powder because it's going to show up on the glass, we're going to use a Dual powder because the Dual powder is going to give us sort of a shiny appearance against the glass itself. And so aluminum flake powder or Dual powders are generally the powders you use on surfaces like this. So again, we have a number of different surfaces. We also have a number of colored surfaces on here. And if we're looking for fingerprints on these colored surfaces, we're going to be choosing a fingerprint powder or a way of identifying the fingerprints that's going to give us good contrast. Now, it's cold outside. It's in the 30s, and so chances are that we're going to be able to use a dusting powder to give us visible fingerprints. But if it were really cold, and it had been cold for several days or maybe even several hours, the fingerprint residue is going to solidify. It's going to freeze. and much like butter in the refrigerator. And what will happen is the fingerprint residue is going to be resistant to retaining dust particles. So we have to force the fingerprint residue to give up some of its, we have to sort of melt it, if you will. One way to do that might be to blow on it using warm breath. When you do that, you run the risk of contaminating the print itself with your DNA, and really what you're interested in is the DNA that's present in the print. So another way to do this might be to use something like SPR. SPR is an aqueous-based powder that you spray, and it's going to come up and give you sort of a metallic-like sheen. It's a gray powder, much like dual powder or aluminum flake powder. But again, it's an aqueous solution, and so it's going to rinse off the DNA that might be there. Wet WAP is a powder suspension, or very concentrated powder suspension, generally ferric oxide. And the ferric oxide is going to get onto the fingerprint, but it has to be washed off with water, which is going to, again, wash away the DNA. So we're concerned about getting methods here that are going to allow us to identify this print. We also want to retain the DNA. Powders are going to be the best way to do that. One way to do this might also be to encompass this in a small humid atmosphere and do superglue fuming on it. That would require having a small box that would fit over this, and with a water source that's going to fume it, and then allow you to have the superglue develop the print. And once you do that, you've protected the DNA, and then you can dust for the DNA that way, and that works just fine.